There was a time where I would basically drop the majority of things that I would have to do in order to sit down and just play a game. But it leads me to ask a ridiculous question that when I was younger I thought I would never have to ask. Have video games actually changed, or is it just me? This is something that I have spoken about a little bit before, in regards to having too much choice within video games. A link to that video is in the top. But I've recently been feeling like I don't really know what I want to play. Now, back when I was younger, I was always jumping between games and making it very clear that I enjoyed all forms of media when it comes to gaming. Well, apart from real-time strategy. I really just can't seem to get into that, and it seems a little bit too slow for me. But opinion is one thing. But what about taking a look at games from back a day and then comparing them with the games that we have available today? Do they really stand the test of time? Has gaming had dramatic changes in the last decade alone that people just aren't aware of? Or am I just being dumb? Video games have been around for a few decades now, so in the form of entertainment, it's still relatively new. When you look at books that have been around for centuries, and even motion pictures, or movies if you're a commoner like me, they've been around for a century at least. If you look at the way games have changed over the years, there's quite a few points that you can pick out quite easily. The graphics are a big one for most people now. If you take a look at what gaming looked like when it was first introduced, look at games like Pong. That was a weird table tennis game made in the 70s, and compare that with more modern AAA titles like Cyberpunk. Over the space of 50 years, we've managed to turn these pixels into a beautiful work of art. Is this necessarily the most important thing though? When you look at people that do reviews for games, one of the biggest things that people will talk about are the graphics of the game that they're playing. Now, this is something that I've always been caught up in, more recently than anything else, because it seems to be the thing that people are the most interested in. And I'll say seeing a game look beautiful is incredible. The things that people can create with simple lines of code in a development engine are absolutely insane. I don't, however, think that this is the be-all and end-all of a game. Some of my favourite games are made with different art styles, and they are so far from beautiful. Look at Vampire Survivors, Stardew Valley. And then look at some of the most popular games that there are right now on the market. Games like Minecraft and Roblox. These are doing great for themselves, and yet they don't look the best. I understand that the art style is designed in a way that even lower end consoles and PCs can play them, but it's still insane to think about how much fun you can have with something that just doesn't look as good as it's supposed to. It seems to be that graphics, although can be really important, they aren't the reason that we're playing these games still. Then why do we? I mean, the fun aspect, I guess? Maybe it's the gameplay loop. Think about older games, like Duck Hunt. You're literally standing there and shooting ducks. But this was back when gaming was new, so the idea of this was a lot more breathtaking than it is right now. I think the last time I saw games that were even similar to that was back on the Nintendo Wii. And I think one of the reasons why the Nintendo Wii was so popular was just because it emulated a lot of things people loved when they were younger. It was a lot more of an arcade style in the games that were popular. Whenever most people think about the Nintendo Wii, they'll just think of games like Wii Sports, Mario Kart, Smash Brothers, all of which could be perfect arcade titles. This then brings me on to the idea of nostalgia. This could be an entire topic on its own, so I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. We all have certain memories of things that we've enjoyed in the past, and for some people it just almost seems like the power of nostalgia is so overpowering. There's a few reasons why this can be. A lot of the time we remember things as being way better than they actually were, as we usually try to retain happy memories and then try to dispel any bad ones. We also have a tendency, as people, to try and improve our memories without even thinking about it. So as memories will start to alter and change over time, obviously that's how we're going to perceive them. Now, a personal example of this for me is the original Halo game. I remember it looking perfect when it came out. But then when I replayed the original a few years ago, I saw it for what it really was, and graphically it was poor in comparison to the modern standards. This also has something to play here though. Because of the new standards that games have been producing, it becomes almost second nature to remember a game looking way better than it actually is because we're used to this level of graphical fidelity. So the concept of playing games has 100% changed, and I don't really think that that's a bad thing. Back when I was younger, people didn't really have collections of games, or at least they didn't to my knowledge. I think that the main reason for this was because of the second-hand market. I personally used to finish a game and then just trade it in so I could go and get something else. And I know that most of my friends did this as well. Now, that isn't really the same as it is, because most games we buy now are all digital. And this is a relatively newer thing for the console market, but the PC gamers out there will most likely have almost nothing on disc. To be honest, even saying that makes me feel a little bit weird. If I went to somebody's house and I saw their gaming rig and it still had a DVD drive, I would most likely laugh at it. Not because I'm being rude, just because it's such a weird thing that people would actually install an optical drive on their PC and play games from discs in this day and age. Consoles are releasing digital-only consoles, and they are selling incredibly well. I think the introduction of a complete digital age is coming in faster than people actually realise, and to be honest, it seems incredibly scary. These days, people are all collecting half of their games over digital libraries, and I'm one of them. At current, my Steam library alone is over 300 games, and I've only really been playing on PC for around 2 years. Online storefronts often put on sales where games are sold at a much bigger discount than they can do on physical games, so it becomes a lot easier to build a collection without having the physical space allocated to actually hold all of these games that you're buying. When you buy a game, a disc edition of a game, you have to install it onto your console anyway, and most of the time it only has a small amount of the game actually on the disc, and the rest of it needs to be installed through the internet anyway, meaning that gaming is just moving more towards an online world. And even if all of the game is on the disc, with the state that games are coming out at the moment, you're going to need the online patches anyway, so you have to be connected to the internet in order to receive those. Do you remember back when games used to come with these massive instruction manuals? Notice how that got pretty quickly phased out? Well, these days you're lucky if you get anything in a boxed game aside from the actual disc, unless you buy a collector's edition. And most of the time, it just tells you that you can find out whatever it is you wanted to look for on the internet with a cheeky Google search. They also started including tutorials inside the actual games that are being released, so I guess that kind of means that people are less likely to actually need an instruction manual anyway, as most of the button layouts and mechanics are available to you very quickly. Right now, time is moving so fast that we don't even really need to buy games anymore. Not really. You have services that are available: Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, GeForce Now. Hell, we even had Google Stadia. I mean, it's not the perfect example, but it was the start of something that has taken gaming to another level. And these systems work. Something just like Netflix, Hulu, BBC iPlayer, and all of the other streaming services. You pay a flat price and have access to a selection of games to download and play on your console. It's basically Blockbuster but online for video games. And they've also introduced cloud gaming, which is a completely different kettle of fish. Having the ability to play your games without having to download anything. Not having to ever update your games, and you just play them over an internet connection. I mean, sure, this is still a good few years off actually being completely viable as a main form of playing games, especially across the rest of the world. But the fact that it now exists is insane to think about how far gaming has come and what a ridiculous change this actually is. I mean, the way that the industry is moving as a whole is starting to get a bit weird. We've had our dev teams move from making incredible single-player experiences to having more of a focus on competitive play. I mean, now that the internet is a staple in most homes, it does make sense that we use this more than ever, but it seems strange that things like this seem to fall by the wayside. We used to have incredible couch co-op games that we could just sit and play with our family and friends, like the original Halo games, but now it's all been traded in for the sake of playing everything online. Now obviously this isn't true for everything, there are some exceptions to the rule. I mean, PlayStation have recently been bringing out some amazing single player experiences, and there are still a few games that have local co-op, but they're mostly on the Nintendo Switch, oddly enough. But it just seems to feel like it's a dying art. When Halo 5 released and I found out that you couldn't play the main campaign couch co-op, I was beyond furious. Alongside the mass outbreak of multiplayer games, we had the introduction of the terribly acclaimed Battle Passes. You pay some real world money and then you get some in-game items as reward. I mean, it's not a terrible business model, companies are making a hell of a lot of money from this, but it does sometimes seem a little bit anti-consumer. Remember when you used to play Halo 3 multiplayer, and in order to change your skin, you needed to make sure that you were hitting up the challenges so you could unlock armor pieces. Now, you just need to pay $8.99, and within a few hours you'll be able to completely change what you look like. This is a piece of video gaming that has become way more prominent in the last few years. Microtransactions. EA is the king of this, and they have made a hell of a lot of money due to it, and then other companies decided to follow suit. And now we've ended up here, in a world where you can pay £70 for a brand new game, but a lot of the content that you could want is locked behind a further paywall. This isn't really the first time it's happened though, right? I mean, look at World of Warcraft. This is an MMO from back a day. Coming out all the way back in 2004, you had to buy the game. I mean, fair enough, the price wasn't as high, but inflation and all of that. But then you also had to pay for a subscription to the game on top of the price of buying the game. There are arguments for this though. These larger online games needed the extra money to pay for server costs and updating the content, whereas consoles like Xbox and PlayStation do charge for their online services, so paying extra to play specific games on these wouldn't really make as much sense. So this isn't a new concept, but it's becoming more normalised, and I'm not too sure how I feel about it. Battle passes in things like Fortnite and Rocket League, I completely get. These games are free to play, and it's a good way for them to make the money back that they are spending on the game in the first place. But when you're already paying a lot of money for a game in the first place, it seems incredibly strange for them to try and bleed you dry using microtransactions. I think it's clear to see, games have changed so much since the first introduction of them. But then it's hard to say if each of these points are really a good thing or a bad thing. For each point, there's a counterpoint that might be able to swing it another way for either party. On one hand, bleeding money from consumers is a terrible thing. But it does mean that dev teams can expand, they can make more games, they can employ more people. Going primarily digital means that we do have less collectors. People who aren't able to get a hold of physical copies of the game, it's not too much of a big deal right now, because it does mean we have much easier access to games, and they're usually a lot more readily available than when we used to have to run to the shop and hope they still had a copy of that game left, especially on launch day when it was a particularly exciting launch. Gaming itself has changed, but how about the way that we perceive them? I'm at a point in my life where I still love video games, almost a terrible amount. If I could have a job where playing them would pay my bills, I would be one of the happiest men alive. But it doesn't mean it's all I want to do anymore. With a switch in priorities, the way that I personally consume content has had to change. I'm sure most people are the same. I used to love RPGs, but I just don't have the time for them anymore. I started Cyberpunk 2077 all the way back in November, and I'm only just coming around to finishing it off now. But then time is in abundance as a kid. You could play for hours and not feel terribly ashamed that you haven't left the house, or realise that you've run out of time and you still haven't managed to get any of your laundry done. You start to grow up, and as you do, you realise there's a major shift in what you can do. Games have become even more readily available, allowing for a much greater selection of choice right at your fingertips. I mean, you have money now, right? If you want to get a game, it's there for you, at your disposal. But you might not get a chance to play it. You could have a child now. You could be looking after someone who is sick. You could have a buzzing social life where your friends want to go down to the pub and watch football at the weekends. Or you could just have a really hectic job that keeps you busy. But this is something that can really impact on the way that you view video games. Back when we were kids, we would play whatever we could get our hands on. Maybe it was because you wanted something to distract you from school. Maybe you wanted to try and be social. I remember me and a few kids on my road, we would all sit down and split screen multiplayer on Halo 2. It's still to this day one of my fondest memories. The games we choose then were mostly just what we were given, what was popular at the time, or something that we had seen that we were just generally excited for. And thinking to it now, none of these aspects have really changed. We still play games to distract us from work or responsibilities. We play games to be social with our friends. It's just that now it's online. Or I guess you're all sitting on the sofa playing the same single player game together. And the games that we play now come from deep-rooted love of franchises that we once loved as kids, or games that we've been recommended by the countless marketings that's available online, or by our friends' suggestions. And the industry itself is changing, rapidly. And us as consumers, maybe we're not. The shift in priorities may change the amount of time we've got and what we can enjoy based on that, but we still like the same stuff. Habits we've adapted from childhood stay with us as we grow. And sure, we can adapt a little. I like simulator games way more now than I used to, and with the introduction of mobile gaming in more recent years, it's becoming easier for non-traditional gamers to get a glimpse of what's so fun and addicting about this world. But if you feel like I've missed anything, feel free to let me know down below in the comments. Make sure to like the video if you've enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss an upload, and take it easy.